Hey guys, Keith here. All right, time for another update video, this time covering versions 2018.56 through to 2019.03. Not a huge amount here, although definitely some big changes with things like 3D coming in. But I wanted to quickly run through this. I'm not going to go through everything in detail. I'm going to point you to some other videos. Particularly for 3D and some of the other enhancements. But let's quickly run through. We'll do the xLights ones first, and then we'll quickly run through the xSchedule ones. So let's start way back with 56, which seems forever ago, back in December. Rotate option for the custom model dialog. So the custom model dialog is when you click on a custom model like my bauble here and you come into here, there's now a rotate 90 here, which will rotate the model around. Now notice that it's actually chopped it off as well because this is not actually 27 by 27. So we probably want to cancel that, go back into our model data and make this 27 by 27 before we do the rotate, rotate 90. And now it's rotating the top of the baubles now over there. And then of course we can trim off our unused space and get it back to a model. So yeah, so a simple way to rotate the model properly in here. Obviously you can still come here and grab the bar up here and rotate it up here. But when you render on it in xLights, it will actually still be in its original form. So sometimes you actually do want to do that rotation. So there's that one. Add support for multi-string custom models. Okay, so with custom models, historically, when you've uploaded them to your controllers, we've always treated them as if they were one single string. I've now added the ability for you to actually say that actually, no, this thing's got multiple strings. And remember, strings, when we're doing an upload to a controller, is a proxy for the number of outputs on the controller that you're using. So let's take this particular model. It's not a simple model. It goes to 100 nodes. So let's imagine that I've actually got it as 50 and 50 on my controller. So what I can do is I can come over here into my model properties. Let's stretch this out a little bit so that you can see some things here. So it's currently on port 25 of my controller. I'm going to change this strings from 1 to 2. When I do that, you'll notice it's now using up ports 25 and 26 on my controller. It hasn't changed, but there's now this individual start nodes. And so what it's going to do is it's going to put pixels 1 to 50 on the first string, and then pixels 51 through to 100 on the second string. But let's imagine it's not actually split 50-50. I can come in here, select the individual start nodes, and I can say actually the second string is starts at node 76 and runs through to 100. Technically, I could even do 76 and 1, which says that string 2 actually is, so string 2 is going to report it connected on port 26, but it's actually the first string of the model, and string 1 starts at 76 and that's connected to port 25. So you can actually do some things which prior to now have actually not been very easy to do without a lot of manual configuration on your controller. So that's kind of cool. Once again, looking to expand the number of use cases where you can just do an upload to your controller, because it is by far the simplest and lowest risk way of configuring your controllers. And whenever you change things, you just push it up and everything's good to go. So that's custom models and multiple strings and start channels, start nodes, etc. Very, very powerful. Okay, so the next change here is the full support for model connection properties. So for this one here, what I've done is I've switched to a simpler layout. This one has 5 snowflakes. They're all pretty straightforward. They're all connected on port 1. They're all chained together. Very, very straightforward. And when you upload it to the control, it results in 180 pixels on output 1 because they're only about 30 odd pixels each, which is all pretty straightforward. Now, let's imagine if I wanted to, between, I don't know, 3 and 4, I wanted to add a null pixel. Now, in these new controller connection properties that have been introduced, there is actually that sort of setting here. So we can come into here and say, well, on Snowflake 4, there's actually a null pixel before it. And if we come back to our setup tab and we upload to our controller, to the Falcon, we go, yep, that looks good. And we go back and we refresh the page here, you'll see that what it's done is it's actually gone and created a virtual string, and it has put a null pixel at the beginning of that virtual string. So the first 3 snowflakes are connected on the first string, and then the last 2 are here, and there's a null pixel. So fully uploaded, configured. Let's imagine that the second snowflake had a slightly different color order. So we could come into here and we could say, no, it's not actually RGB, it's BGR. We click save. We come back to here. We right click, upload to controller, output Falcon. Yes. Go back to our Falcon, refresh it. And now we've got 3 virtual strings because that second one, which has got 2 snowflakes on it, are in BGR color order. Now notice how it's got 2 snowflakes rather than just the 1. And the reason for that is because I assume if you do not set a setting on the snowflake that follows it, you don't set anything here. I assume that it follows whatever it is that happened here. And so this is also assumed to be BGR color order. However, the following one doesn't inherit it because you've overridden the null nodes. So if you wanted this one to still be RGB, you would have to come down here to color order and set that to RGB, which is fine. Save, go back to setup, upload to controller, output Falcon, yep, and refresh. And now we'll see that it creates the 4th virtual string in order to change the color order back to RGB, and then it needs that one for the null pixels. So yeah, so all of these properties that sit down here under your advanced connection settings can now be uploaded, and the appropriate settings on the Falcon will be created, and if you need to, it will add virtual strings to make sure that all of that is correct. So that's that one. Moving on, test for outer order universes on a controller in check sequence. Well, it turns out that some controllers care. Some don't. Probably most, but some do. So if I was to come in here and add another 8.0.125 starting universe 11, looks good, and I'll just drag that up so that they're now out of order. Now if I was to run tools, check sequence, it will come and give me an issue here because it will say that universe 1s through 10 occurs after universe 11, and some controllers don't like out of order universes. It's only a warning. If your controller doesn't care, you obviously can choose to ignore the warning, but it's there to try and help people find issues that otherwise might occur. 3D, for those that have been living under a rock, xLights is now fully 3D enabled. There is this checkbox up here which will put everything into 3D mode. Yes, it is normal for everything to sit over here on the right hand side when you first go into 3D mode. The way the the coordinate system works is that the 2D mode coordinate system sits between 0 and the positive numbers, whereas obviously the 3D has 0 as the center point here, and consequently you do get this stuff off to the side. If you never collect the 3D checkbox, then you can just continue to work in 2D. 2D does give you the ability to zoom in and out, which is kind of neat. One of the things you may have noticed is this green box, and the green box represents the region which is the default size. It's basically controlled by these height and width settings, which obviously you would use for your background image. So if you start to play with these numbers and set these to, I don't know, 800 or something, this box will change in size. So the green box is showing you that default size. It's also the default size when you go and create a sequence. It's going to be the default viewable area of the house preview, although of course you can resize that. If you happen to be in 3D mode, you can get to 3D mode here as well if you want to see your show playing in 3D. So that's also there. Now, I'm not going to exhaustively go over 3D. There are a number of videos that Gil's already made that cover 3D in a lot of detail, and I will also go through it in some of the beginner seminars to some degree. But it really deserves its own things. Now, sorry. The 3D itself is not just a visual gimmick. There are also some sequencing changes over here. When you have per preview, you now have this new thing called a camera, and when you're in layout, you can actually choose an arbitrary perspective, and you can save that current viewpoint. You give that a name, and then if you go back into your sequencer and you were to drop an effect on, and it's per preview, you can now choose that particular camera view, and that's the view from, or the direction from which it will render. So there are some rendering characteristics here that have also changed under 3D. But yeah, I'm not going to go through 3D in any great detail. Okay, so the next one's this 2D value curve generator. The 2D value curve is basically a new tool. I've created another video on it. It's up here under this generate 2D path. But I'll let you go and watch that video so you can see what's going on there. Exclude faces not used in a sequence from a package sequence file. So probably the easiest way to show that is if I go to my show. I have a number of faces set up. So my matrix here has just the snowman set up, but also my tree here has this green tree set up. So yeah, so there's a couple of faces set up, but if I load a sequence, I actually don't have that many things. So Christmas Can has a singing face in it. If I open up that sequence and I go to Tools and I package that sequence up, we'll call it Christmas Can.zip. And if I was to go to that folder and have a look inside the zip file, one of the things that it does is it brings all the images in, and you'll notice it's brought the snowman faces in because they're used in the sequence, but it didn't bring the green tree faces in. Whereas up until now, the package sequence has always just packaged up all of your face definitions, which wasn't a problem when people very rarely had them. But these days, people have been downloading faces at a rapid rate of knots, and when they package their sequences, they get these really inflated sequence files containing a whole bunch of things that are actually not required for the sequence. Now, one thing to be wary of is that it doesn't actually remove the face definitions from your RGBFX file. So the green faces are still pointed to by the RGBFX file, but the files aren't included. So those face effects obviously won't work, but the face still exists. But that's neither here nor there because you're going to import it at any rate. So it shouldn't be a big deal. Let's cover the scheduler changes. So add control over what happens when the remote X schedule gets told to stop playing a sequence. So this is kind of a bit of a word, a mouthful. But if I go to here, when in remote mode, turn off all lights when the master stops. So if you're running X schedule as a remote from another X schedule or from a Pi, you can basically control what happens when the master stops. By default, it will turn all the lights off, but you may want the lights to stay on to get a more seamless transition, etc. In which case you'll have to manually manage turning all the lights off at the end. So an option in there for those that care and want to control it. Is add visual indication of slowness. So here we've got a schedule that's playing. It's playing some songs. You can't hear it. I've turned it off. That way I don't run into the YouTube police. If you were to click next step here and move to the next song, one of the things that happens is there's some delays that occur, right? xSchedule has to go and load the music and convert it and everything else. And if you watch down here in the bottom right-hand corner, when I jump to the next step, you'll see a tortoise appears very briefly, appears for about a second, and that just indicates that xSchedule has noticed that a frame or two were dropped. In this case, no actual data was dropped. What happened was, while it was busy loading the audio file in that fraction of a second, it missed at least two normal frames, which is about 100 milliseconds while it was busy loading that audio file. And so it detects that and it will show a little tortoise down here to indicate that, hey, something happened and it was a little bit slow. Now, you would expect that on song transitions, it will pop up and it will go away. But if that's starting to appear more regularly or in the middle of songs or whatever else, something else may be going on, and we'll need to have a look at exactly what's going on with your particular scheduler. So a visual indication that, hey, things aren't quite right and things are running a little bit slowly. And so that was that came out in 56. The final change to the scheduler is adding a test mode. The test mode is here as one of these modes. Basically, if you go into test mode, you can't be playing anything, etc., because it's obviously going to be outputting test data. And there's a configure test down here. This menu item may not work in .3. But it'll be working in .4. Configure test just lets you set the type of tests that you want. So alternate will alternate the values of each channel. Foreground will just set the foreground color. Then ABC all, and etc. will just rattle through. It kind of assumes you're running pixels and will rattle through the colors. Your foreground, you can get that, set that between 0 and 255, and the background as well. And so when it's alternating, it'll be between, in this case, between fully off and fully on, but you can choose different values in between. And then 500 milliseconds is how frequently it will change. So you can increase that or reduce that, etc. Once you've set that up, you can then come up into modes and put it into test mode. It shows up down here that it's in test mode, and you can see it's now outputting data and will continue to do so until you put it back. There is also a full API that sits behind that as well, as you would expect. It is xSchedule. And so if we have a look in the usual place, it's on GitHub. But I'm just going to quickly find my local copy here. the API documentation. Uh, there's basically a start test mode and stop test mode API. The stop test mode will restore xschedule back to whatever previous mode it was in. And with the test mode, you're actually able to control exactly which mode it's in and so forth. Um, it is also possible to pass in the model name here. There is an API that will return back a list of all the models that xLights knows about. And then if you pass a model name in here, it will actually only run the test on that particular model. That feature is not available through the UI. Someone will have to build a web UI or something to use that. It didn't seem that valuable to put it on here, but obviously having it on your phone or something might be useful, and who knows, we might be able to inspire Will to upgrade the UI and add some testing functionality. So guys, that's it. Not a huge amount of change in the last few releases, except obviously for the absolutely massive impact of 3D, which you're all going to probably spend the bulk of the year playing with and trying out and deciding whether it suits you or not. If you don't want to use 3D, that's not a reason not to upgrade. Just don't check the checkbox and it will still run as it always has in the old 2D mode, but you'll also have zoom in and zoom out and all those sort of cool features that comes with the 3D upgrade. So thanks, guys.